This BizNews briefing is brought to you by Investec Business Banking. Make the move from business as usual to Investec Business Banking.
It's Monday, the 17th of March. This is your BizNews briefing. I'm Bronwyn Nielsen. In our top story, we drill down into the expulsion of SA Ambassador to the US, Ebrahim Rasool. I caught up with Joel Pollak, Senior Editor at Large at Breitbart News out of California, and got his thoughts on this latest debacle between the United States and South Africa.
Well, he dug his own hole, really, because you don't go in public, certainly, and call the president of the United States a white supremacist leader. His analysis was really conspiratorial and, to my mind, a little crazy, but that's just my personal view. He is the ambassador of South Africa, or was the ambassador of South Africa to the United States. And you just don't expound on those conspiracy theories in public, especially at a time when you're trying to repair relations with the United States. And the Trump administration took very swift action. The same day he was declared persona non grata, I believe he has a few days to collect his belongings and leave.
Joel, I just want to come back to Ebrahim Rasool. Has this happened before? Does it happen on a regular basis where the ambassador to a country is expelled?
It's very rare. Students of diplomacy know this process or procedure. It's well known enough that it's understood by members of the Foreign Service, but it is rare. The persona non grata status is typically reserved for extreme cases, usually if a diplomat commits some kind of crime. Diplomats have immunity, not just in the United States, but in other countries, and that generally shields them from most prosecutions. But if they commit some really terrible act and they're going to be prosecuted, generally the host country will declare them persona non grata, and then they have to leave and they face whatever consequences they have to face in their home country. So this is a fairly unusual step, but it's also, I must say, unusual for an ambassador to express himself in that way. And there are many ambassadors who don't like President Trump, who don't like the United States. I think there was a kind of arrogance with which the remark was delivered. And keep in mind also that Ambassador Rasool had been trying to develop contacts with the White House, with members of Congress, and having reached out in that way, he then insulted the president. I think you have to look at it in that context. He knew his job was to repair relations, and instead of putting every effort toward doing that, he decided to impress his South African audience by calling Trump a white supremacist. It's the combination of those two things, I think, that made the persona non grata process necessary, even though it is one of the more severe sanctions that a country can produce against a diplomat.
You can catch that full interview with Joel Pollak on biznews.tv. Every Sunday evening, Chris Steyn sits down with the leader of the United Independent Movement, Neil de Beer. Neil, this Sunday, was very quick to share his thoughts on Ebrahim Rasool. Let's take a listen.
This is the first time, as far as I'm knowledgeable about, that in the past 30 years, a diplomat or a person representing our country has been declared persona non grata by a foreign state. I want us to stop there, because this is the ultimate embarrassment. This is the last line. I think that any person, no matter your stance, no matter your opinion on what Mr. Rasool had to say, put your emotion aside and let's quickly calm down and think like a reasonable person. Mr. Rasool, who, by the way, is not unknown to the US, who has been an ambassador overseas, is also a person schooled in politics and diplomacy. He was a premier of the Western Cape. He's a stalwart in the ANC. Therefore, all of this equals no excuse. None whatsoever as far as I'm concerned. So when you take the ANC and you take the rhetoric of where you stand on politics aside, here's the cold fact. You're a diplomat. There's a word derived from that called diplomacy. And you can extend that word to understanding what is decorum. You don't need to be literate, educated. You just go look it up. But decorum, diplomacy, diplomat all burns down, Chris, to one thing. That you always show courtesy, respect, manners, build a bridge, calm a relation, and ensure that when you do all of this, you keep in mind that when you open your bloody mouth, you speak on behalf of 60 million people on behalf of the country that you sit there. So Mr. Rasool joins a webinar, a public posted webinar, where he is asked to give certain of his opinions. Now, Chris, when you sit there, Ibrahim Rasool matters not. Hy glad nie belangrik nie. He's there, put there, on our behalf as South Africa.
Again, you can catch that full interview with Neil de Beer on biznews.tv. Enoch Godongwana tabled the South African budget for the second time in Parliament last week. And right now, opposition parties are refusing to sign the budget off. Alec Hogg, the founder of BizNews, hosted a post-budget panel discussion. I managed to pull some highlights from that panel discussion and want to share them with you on today's show, starting with Prince Mashile, who is the executive director of the Centre for Politics and Research. Let's take a listen.
The budget, to the way I understand it, you must ask whose budget is this? If you want to understand, is this the budget of a government of national unity? Does it reflect a government of national unity, or does it reflect the DA, or does it reflect the ANC? That's the question. When I read it, and it's the essence of it is this: it is a typical ANC budget. Let me give you 2 or 3 things. Number 1, debt to GDP ratio up, approaching the 77% mark of the World Bank, which is the danger zone. The ANC, that's how it operates. It raises that. That's number 1. Number 2, the public servants wage bill up. This year is going to be 7.3 billion. Next year it's rising again. And the third year, it actually goes above 8 billion. So that's the second thing. The third thing, and this is the most worrying part of the budget for me, there's a statement in there by the minister. He says that we now have 28 million South Africans on social grants. 28 million. And he celebrates it.
Yes.
He says this reflects our commitment to reducing poverty and inequality. Now that's the ANC's understanding of how to build an economy. Now, in my understanding, and that doesn't reflect an economy that is thriving. It actually reflects an economy that is moving backward, because an economy that is thriving must offload more and more people from the social grant system. That's what we should be appreciating, not adding more and more people. So over the past 30 years, the ANC has been adding people to our social grant system. So the core of it is this. This is a typical ANC budget. Coalition starts now. That's what they must fight to pull the ANC back, because the ANC is going up in terms of the budget. They must pull the ANC back. Then I will say they are winning.
Staying with the post-budget discussion, Anne Bernstein, who is Executive Director of the Centre for Development and Enterprise, was very clear on her thoughts on where South Africa finds itself at the moment and didn't hold back.
I'm not giving up on South Africa, and we've spent the last nearly a year thinking hard about what are the priorities to get us out of this mess. You can't fix everything at once in the country. You have to start first, which nobody wants to do, with a diagnosis of what is wrong. And a lot of our speakers sort of came with big words and big generalizations. I think it needs a lot more specificity, and we need a common diagnosis. One of the things that's wrong is that our state doesn't work. So you can't accept that proposition and in the next sentence say, I want the state to do this, that, and the next thing. It's not going to happen. So what we've done is try and identify, which is a hard task, what are the priorities for the coalition government, as it turned out, we started before that, to actually move towards a growth strategy. And what are the things you have to do? They range from you have to get the top people in the country, the best possible people to be in charge of key institutions, whether it's the biggest SOEs on the board, the chief executive officer, the financial officer. We have to change the game here, and that requires, as a first step, getting the right people in place. You have to move from that to re-establishing the rule of law, which we have not had one successful prosecution of a big fish involved in state capture. The National Prosecuting Authority does not have access to the full archive of the Zondo Commission, which is held by the Minister of Justice. Think about that. The head of the NPA has asked the president to remove somebody they have investigated who occupies the regional directorship of Johannesburg in the NPA. August 2003, the request was made, which is the legal process. They have yet to hear from the president. So without the rule of law, without the best people running our critical institutions, you are going to have continued corruption and elite looting, and you're going to have lots and lots of our tax money wasted. They don't know how to spend money properly. They're officials who don't do their jobs properly. There are teachers who don't know how to teach maths or science or English. So the issues facing the country are complex. You can see a picture in the budget, but I don't want to pay more and more tax to a government that doesn't know how to spend the tax they already have. And that's critically important. So a common diagnosis, a seriousness about growth, not just words. What hard choices are we going to make that will get the country to start growing again? And unless we grow, we're not going to get jobs. And unless we change the laws to create much more labor-intensive firms, we're not going to get jobs. So by the stroke of a pen, you could say that if the collective bargaining deals that Alec and his workers get into should apply to Alec and his workers, whatever they agree, but they should not be extended by the Minister of Labour to anybody else. But that's what we do, and we kill off small businesses and we deter new startups from starting. So the diagnosis leads to the insights into what's wrong with the South African economy. And unless we get beyond the words, growth, inclusive growth, whatever, which no one really defines, we're going to be in this situation next year again.
At Sun Exchange, we make going solar simple, profitable, and completely risk-free. Join over 100 satisfied South African customers already enjoying the benefits of risk-free solar. Start saving today. Visit sunexchange.com and join the solar revolution.
In the world of business banking, the bottom line can often triumph over relationships. At Investec, we value both. Make the move from business as usual to Investec Business Banking. Out of the ordinary.
Another panelist on Alex post-budget panel discussion was Magnus Haystack, the founder of Brenthurst Wealth, who's been advising his clients to take money offshore for the last decade. He was very clear that he is not changing his advice anytime soon.
I can only advise my clients to the best of my ability on the facts that I have at my disposal and that I've been doing for a very, very long time. And the facts 13, 14, 15 years ago started signaling there's trouble on its way. And it started with the downgradings, the Gupta years, the Zuma years. And I had a responsibility to tell my clients, first of all, you can now take some money offshore. We think it's a safer place for your long-term equity, and it has been spectacularly so. I don't need to tell you. Your stock market portfolio is a sign of how much wealth you've created for that portfolio relative to money that was forced to stay in South Africa. I reiterate the fact that 10 years ago, the ANC, and we're still not quite sure, opened the gates to this global investment arena, and people did take it. The late Mike Schuessler did some numbers for me before he passed away, and he worked out South Africans have got more money abroad that foreigners have invested in South Africa. So South Africans have embraced the offshore with your money and live locally. And that has been a tremendous advantage until the facts change. And I am looking continuously for any signs that this body is starting to wake up, this rocket ship is starting to warm up. Until that point, I have a duty to advise my clients, I think you need to externalize or acquire some offshore assets to protect yourself against the dysfunction of the ANC in South Africa.
As the tensions between South Africa and the United States continue to escalate, the European Union and South Africa held a summit last week in Johannesburg. This is the first summit between the European Union and South Africa since 2018. And our Bloomberg colleagues were on the ground in Johannesburg. They bring us all the details.
Today's summit focused on a number of issues. At the global level, we reaffirmed our commitment to multilateralism, to the rule of law, and to the central role that is played by the United Nations in maintaining global peace and security.
For more, Jennifer Zavazaja, our Chief Africa Correspondent in Johannesburg, joins us now. Jen, what more did we hear from the leaders during the summit? We spoke about it yesterday, and that it was the first such summit being held since 2018. Did we learn anything new?
Well, I think, Jumana, if you just take a look at the context that these leaders are meeting in, there was a lot for them to recommit to, right? They actually used the words that this is a new chapter in their relationship. We just heard there from President Ramaphosa talking about the commitment to multilateralism. And we heard from both him and Ursula von der Leyen saying that in the face of more nationalism and protectionist measures that we're seeing globally, this is an opportunity for them to strengthen their ties and start this new chapter. And so we continue to hear really what the relationship has been in the past between these two countries, the European Union and South Africa, and the historical nature of that, and also what that means for them moving forward. And just moving forward on that, Ursula von der Leyen really wanted to stress that she does see how the U.S. and others, she didn't specifically name Donald Trump in the U.S., but she did say as others are pulling back from South Africa, the European Union remains committed to them. And South Africa is a crucial crucial trade partner and also a strategic partner for the European Union. So really, this was about these two groups coming back together again and really making some commitments both to work together on a multilateral front, revise some of the multilateral organizations, but then also financial commitments, which is some of what we did here also on Thursday.
So the thing is with these summits, Jennifer, leaders descend and make a lot of pledges, but how much of that is actually going to translate into commitments and into action?
Yeah, and I know you know that better than anyone, Jumana. That is always a lot of the criticism, right, with these summits, because we do hear commitments. We get page-long documents that say all of the things that they have agreed to, but what exactly is going to go into play? And that was part of why this is significant, at least financially, what we did get from this package. And so Ursula von der Leyen mentioned this 4.7 billion euro package. We knew a little bit about it going into the summit, but she continued to expand on it. Just specifically, what's important here is the commitment to helping South Africa with this just energy transition partnership. This has been something that a lot of other emerging market nations, South Africa, Indonesia, and a few others, had gotten commitments from developed nations to help them transition away from coal. The U.S. recently pulled back from that for South Africa. And so at least getting this financial commitment was seen as significant. Not just that, we also did hear about some other commitments to help with the production of vaccines. And so, I say all of this, Jumana, to say these are a lot of things that we can actually test and look at over time. And South Africa President Ramaphosa seemed committed and actually reassured by what he is hearing. But, we also do have a few goalposts, I guess is what I should call them, here in 2025. And that is, of course, South Africa's hosting the G20 presidency. Ursula von der Leyen will be here later this year. She talked about that, as will a number of other European leaders. So you can only expect that we'll continue to hear, or at least get questions about what the progress has been, and hopefully get some answers then.
Bloomberg also caught up with Nobel laureate in economics Paul Krugman to get his thoughts on the trade war and the impact that all the uncertainty in the US is having on consumer confidence. Let's take a listen.
Paul, it's really good to get your perspective on this. What we're seeing is the soft data and the vibes deteriorate. When does that lead into that hard data? What's the lag time?
Well, if I believe some of what I was hearing on your own program, some of the consumer-facing, businesses are already seeing it. So it probably starts to show. I mean, you got to bear in mind that even, when we get data for March, it'll actually be data for the first half of March, really. And so it'll take a while before it's really in the numbers. But if this is for real, if consumers are as upset as they say they are, this is going to be a pretty heavy blow to the economy.
And that raises the silly question for me of are tariffs actually inflationary, which raises the question, are we in a trade war or a tariff war? And a tariff's one-time cost increase versus a trade war that can be really prolonged.
Well, I think we are in a trade war, but even so, I mean, if it's 25% tariffs on everything around the world, even that is a one-time pop in prices unless it somehow feeds into a continuing process. And one of the great unknowns here, I mean, there's so many unknowns, but one of the great unknowns is whether it's a one-time hit, whether it's something like a pop in the price of oil, which the Fed ignores because it believes that those don't lead to sustained inflation, or is this something that's going to sort of dislodge, destabilize inflation expectations and end up being a longer-term problem? And I don't know. The point is actually nobody knows, which is part of this environment of extreme uncertainty that is now surrounding everything.
So how much stock, though, should we put into this type of survey data on longer-term consumer expectations? Because I went back and looked at what some of that survey data looked like in 2017 when we were kind of starting up the first sort of batch of Trump tariffs during his first term here. And you did not necessarily see that type of pessimism so soon in the process.
Yeah, this is kind of unique. I mean, it's actually stunning how fast consumer expectations have deteriorated. I wrote about this on my Substack today. That I thought I thought we would have a few months at least of people feeling good. Great, we've got a businessman president, he's going to bring things under control. But the combination of this, not just the tariffs, but the on again, off again, on again, off again tariffs, the confused rhetoric, and I think also the crazy stuff, we're going to annex Canada, has dislodged people's certainties about the future much, much faster than, I think it's probably a record. I don't think anybody's ever seen them deteriorate so fast under a new administration.
That brings us to the end of this Biz News briefing. We'll be back tomorrow with more context on both the global and local front. Thanks as always for watching.
This Biz News briefing is brought to you by Investec Business Banking. Make the move to private banking service now for your business.